This is the Federal Mobility Policy Update for October 23rd, 2020. This week, our guests are Beth Osborne from Transportation for America and Lena Federico from the ClimateWorks Foundation. On the show, we'll cover updates on Congress and the transit crisis. Then, we'll examine the state of 5-year federal transportation funding and what does it mean for reform. We'll also discuss the Trump administration's block of Seattle, Portland, and New York for federal transit pandemic funding. Lastly, we'll announce the new winners of the Mobility Matching Fund grants and why national support for local advocates is essential at this time. Welcome to another edition of the Federal Mobility Policy Update. With us today, we've got Beth Osborne from Transportation for America and my colleague Martha Rosowski from Further Strategies. In a moment, we'll be listening to the work of ClimateWorks and their support for the Mobility Fund. We'll be announcing the winners on this broadcast later. But first, let's start, as we always do, with the 3 quick hits. Beth, 3 quick hits.
Sure. We've heard story about a COVID relief bill before the election, and there seems to be a new headline every day. There will be, there won't be. Well, it looks like there won't be, but that's really no surprise. The good news is that in the ends of those negotiations, it really did look like transit relief had gotten a lot of traction. The second is the administration has put out an executive order stating that no federal aid should go to what they call anarchist cities. Those anarchist cities tend to be those communities that had large demonstrations in favor of racial justice, but in this administration's eyes, that's a lack of law and order. And so they're withholding transit funds from those communities, including New York, Portland, and Seattle. And the third is that Congress extended funding for all government programs under last year's spending rules until December the 11th. And they extended the surface transportation bill, which funds our highways and transit, and had expired, was set to expire on September the 30th of this year. They extended it for a year.
That's great. Let's unpack those 3 things. Martha, I'll let you lead the conversation or ask you to lead the conversation.
I'd be happy to. Thanks for being with us, Beth, today.
Sure.
So in these stimulus conversations, as you said, on again, off again, now pretty much off again, thanks to Senator McConnell. At one point I was reading that they were like, oh, one of the easy things would have been transit funding, which is pretty encouraging, right? And perhaps a testament to the great grassroots organizing work that's been happening, or am I missing something here?
No, absolutely right. I mean, there's a long list of things that need to be included, and some are naturally controversial. I could say, for example, unemployment insurance is something that has caused a lot of disagreement. But transit, at least in those early days in the HEROES Act, seemed to have a lot of bipartisan support, and yet that we haven't heard a lot about it since then. So it's been a real struggle for groups like mine, but also those grassroots organizations that have had to spend months just keeping the issue alive day after day by getting members of Congress's attention, their local media's attention, just keeping everybody excited and focused. And it was a real boost to see that because of that work, everyone just kind of thought, yeah, that transit's one of those things we can do, right? So while we didn't get it done, it's good to know that it is one of those things that both parties think should be easy to do.
It's interesting you should say that. We had last week Leanne Hall from the Alliance for a Just Society, and she was talking about, for the first time, you've got a very interesting coalition, a cross-sectoral coalition of grassroots advocates, of labor, and of transit agencies working somewhat in concert. Are you seeing that within the Beltway?
Yeah, it's really interesting to see everyone coming together, and even groups that just did not seem to think transit was a priority. It's one of those things where as long as it's there, you kind of feel like that's maybe something that's taken care of, but the threat of losing it has really energized people to stand up and fight for it. And I think that's something that if we're smart, we can take advantage of these relationships we're forming today and really build momentum once we get past this time of emergency to build out a more robust system that will be naturally better for the environment, for climate, for equity, for fair access to opportunity, healthcare, jobs, schooling, all those things. We can accomplish it all at once if we really put our attention to the needs of transit.
That's great. So let me ask about the anarchist cities bit, which is an executive order that it seemed like at first it didn't really mean much, but then all of a sudden we see the Federal Transit Agency denying funding for PPE, for protective equipment for transit agencies because of this order. And is it just coincidence that the cities they've deemed anarchist happen to have some of the highest transit ridership in the country?
I think we could dig deeply into that issue about whether or not it is the transit ridership itself or the people that the administration views as needing transit. The administration's never been shy about saying that they do not believe transit is a federal priority, that it is a local issue. So it's certainly not something they believe the Fed should be heavily involved in. However, I think one of the things that I want to make sure people pay attention to is, yes, there is a legal case against this. Such an executive order is unlikely to stand. It probably is not a fair reading of the funding that Congress gave, yet that will take a long time to determine, and transit doesn't have time. So this is a dangerous issue, and we need to make sure that no matter what, if this is going to go forward, that Congress acts as soon as possible to say they may not do that, and think twice about giving at least this administration such discretion.
Great.
Is that something? Sorry, you go, Darren.
No, you go. You go, Martha.
We need like a signal, like I'm going to ask first. Is it something Congress can stop? I don't want to go too deep into it. But
no, they could just say that that's not a valid reason to deny transit funds or deny any funds. That'd be a very, very simple thing to do. And I would expect if President Trump were to win re-election, that would be something that the House would absolutely push for. But also just they don't have to give relief money through FTA discretion. Now, it's a shame because you do want to have some flexible money rather than just guess how to hand money out by formula. It'd be much better governance, but a not great formula would be better than money that's withheld from those who need it.
So you came out with a report which has been widely acclaimed by people from the spectrum regarding transportation. Let's unpack a little bit about that. Why don't you talk about that report and how it can be an agenda for moving forward?
Sure. It's called Driving Down Emissions, and where the idea came from was a meeting just about a year ago with House staff who were trying to write a surface transportation bill, and they wanted to address climate, but they didn't have EVs within their jurisdiction really. And so the question was, what can we do from the built environment side? And everyone told them to go read a report that I'm really proud of, that my organization was involved in 13 years ago, called Growing Cooler, and then another report called Moving Cooler, Growing Cooler, looking at land use and how that impacts how much people drive and how much they emit, and Moving Cooler based on looking at how the transportation system itself impacts those things. And the response was, this is hundreds of pages long. It is very technical and hard to read, and there are no policy proposals. Well, why are you giving this to me? And while it was a very useful document, that was a fair criticism. And so we brought that issue to the McKnight Foundation, and they funded us to write something responsive, who breaks something down in few enough pages that a Hill staffer or a policy staffer for an elected official might be able to get through it, might have the time to read through it, and has policy advice for them going forward. So that's what we did. It really starts out with the premise that electrifying the transportation sector is absolutely essential. It just is not sufficient. And so talking about what else we can do, one of the things that I've been trying to communicate is we seek to make buildings more efficient. One of the things we try to do is make a very efficient HVAC system, but we don't put all our eggs in that basket and say, and therefore you don't have to have efficient windows or leave your windows open. We do them both. And in transportation, we seem to be putting all of our eggs in one basket, which is a lot to put on that one strategy. We really need to do both. And the benefit of doing both is when you focus on how much people have to drive, you're addressing a lot of the racial equity issues too. So we can be cleaning up the transportation sector and addressing the decades-long generational damage that a lot of our transportation system has done, particularly to communities of color.
So if the reauthorization of the big transportation bill has been put off by a year, that gives a chance for this document that you've written and other ideas to percolate and perhaps get embedded deeper in what happens with that next bill, no matter which, what we have as an administration.
Yes. The House has taken a ton of them already. The INVEST Act has some really exciting provisions in it. I know that there's interest in the House to introduce a transit parity resolution to say that transit should get just as much funding as highways. So it sounds like there are folks over there willing to push things even further, which is great. But I'm hoping that the Senate will ingest some of this and put it into their bill going forward, no matter who's in charge of the Senate, because while they did say climate, the program really didn't change in that bill.
Right.
That's great.
We have learned that just putting the words in the bills don't necessarily make the kind of change that we need.
Or, saying, yes, spend $55 billion creating more damage, and I'll give you $2 billion to fix the damage while we continue to create it with more money. That strategy is outdated. We shouldn't fall for that again.
So we'll put in the show notes the link to the report, and we'll be able to learn more about that report. We would urge you to read that. One of the supporters of the report was the McKnight Foundation. They also have partnered with us on the Mobility Matching Fund, which we talked to Lena Federico from the Climate Works Foundation, who also was a contributor. Let's take a look at that interview. With us, we have Lena Federico, who was with the Climate Works Foundation, and my colleague, Martha Rosowski. We're here to talk a little bit about the Mobility Matching Fund. You've heard us talk about it for some time. We're happy to announce that now we have our first round of grantees. Martha, why don't you explain what that's about?
I will. First, I'll dive into it and give you all a really brief overview of the groups that we funded through this first round. We're really excited to be supporting local groups working on advocacy around transit, walking, biking. I just wanted to thank Lena and Climate Works as one of the funders of this initial round, as well as the Summit Foundation. And after we do this quick freeze through, we will return and talk with Daryl and Lena about why the dynamics of why we chose to create this fund, and sort of how funders from the electrification world and the mobility, the mode shift world are working together. Okay, so we have awarded just over, the fund awarded $350,000-ish. That was matched by another $350,000. So $700,000 going into local efforts, which is good. It's a drop in the bucket of what is needed, but definitely welcome. So we funded Boston Cyclists Union in Boston and Transportation Alternatives in New York City to do kind of similar work, building on what were called healthy streets in Boston and open streets in New York City, of closing streets to cars or limited car traffic to advanced biking and walking. And both groups are working to make those permanent, and then also to expand the networks of safe places to bike, also bus lanes, building off the plans that cities have adopted but have been slow to implement. So really putting their advocacy muscle to that. We funded Link Houston in Houston and Ride New Orleans, both more focused on transit. Those places have either just completed or are in the process of completing redesigns of their transit system to be more efficient, to better serve more people, particularly more people with low incomes and communities of concern. So mobilizing around both improving transit, but also at this point, just sustaining transit is important. Transportation Transportation Choices Coalition out of Seattle is doing similar work, but on a broader scale. Since March, they've been organizing weekly meetings of a whole bunch of stakeholders across the country, including, the transit, walking, biking people, also labor organizations, land use groups, social justice organizations, Native American rights groups, to really plot the future of transit. Somewhat similar work happening in Minnesota with Our Streets Minneapolis and Move Minnesota, of doing the planning phase for a statewide campaign to dramatically change how transportation is seen, shift it toward more sustainable and equitable modes. San Francisco Bicycle Coalition is doing a different kind of project in the Tenderloin, which is a really challenged area of San Francisco. Every street in the neighborhood is part of the high injury network for Vision Zero. They're piloting a community-based, non-policing approach to improving transportation safety in the neighborhood. So really taking on the inequities around policing on our streets head on, and increasing slow streets, trying to get more of the streets in the Tenderloin to be focused on people, not cars. And finally, East Metro Strong out of Minneapolis is doing what they like to call the peanut butter cup, chocolate and peanut butter, combining transit with the nonprofit rideshare, the locally based rideshare, so that people can link those two modes together. So that's our portfolio. We're excited about it. It's all, community-based organizing, power building, which we realize is essential to changing transportation.
That's great. It's an impressive group of people. The only downside of this is that we didn't have enough money to fund the other great proposals.
Yes.
But we have hope to continue the fund. This was a pilot fund. And, I think what was interesting is we had a range of funders. We had a lot of local place-based funders involved and interested to be the match. In some cases, we know that local funders continued to fund the proposals in spite of the lack of a match. That was exciting about it. And then I think what's most exciting is that we have groups like the Summit Foundation, the McKnight Foundation, and Climate Works seeing the value of this fund. So tell us a little bit about what attracted you to the fund. What were your reasons for, how does that align with your work?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for driving forward the fund, for putting it together, and for investing tireless hours and effort in getting it to where it is today. It was really exciting for Climate Works. I speak on behalf of the transportation team, to partner with some of the national foundations that contributed to the fund, which are our longstanding partners, but also to get a closer sense to and working partnership with the place-based foundations that are matching the funds. And then lastly, to also come in and be able to help some of these local advocacy groups. There's kind of three reasons why Climate Works ended up investing into this fund that I'll go into greater detail, but I wanted to just say that the fund for us sits at the intersection of transportation, climate, and equity. And I think that is the perfect culmination of factors that both give us the confidence that the fund will be successful in lifting those advocacy groups and leading to great outcomes, but also is the reason why we ended up coming in and deciding that this was a worthwhile investment. So the first piece of it is, I just want to say that traditionally climate mitigation efforts and transportation have been focused on electrification and fuel efficiency. And in the last 5 years, with the rise of the great kind of convergence of GPS and all sorts of things, gave rise to a lot of ride-hailing companies and shared mobility platforms at rates and at types, varieties that we've never ever seen before. And so for us, that shifted our traditional focus that has been at the national level more towards cities. And cities have really come forward as the platforms and testing beds for greater, faster decarbonization of the transportation with this testing these new technologies, modes, and so on. So that's the first piece.
I'm going to jump in just for a second there. I think some of the shift towards cities also has been that, like, it's the last bastion of functional government, it seems like sometimes, right? So there's been a real shift away from the federal to the cities. And yet now with federal stimulus, some of the Relief Act and the reauthorization, there's, there is a little bit more of a balance, which I think is healthy. But go cities, man. Like, they balance their budget and they make the decisions that make, that actually make changes on the ground. So continue. I just had to comment there.
I agreed. And I think cities have always been the innovation hubs, but I think their importance has kind of varied across history. And now we're definitely in a time period where they are the drivers of change and at the forefront. So that's really exciting for us. The second piece I wanted to talk about is our community of transportation NGOs and philanthropic funders recently had a really great win, which is around the advanced clean truck rule in California. And that was a very, very unique effort. And I wanted to call it out because it brought together not just the NGO community and philanthropic partners and the industry. We also had frontline communities play a really pivotal role in getting this rule passed, which is the most aggressive of its kind in the world. And it really showed us a few things. Well, first of all, frontline communities are the most impacted by transportation emissions. We all know this. And this was an example of an effort where frontline communities were the kind of like the additional hair on the scale that really got us across the winning line. And it kind of gave us a new perspective on how to work with frontline communities for the frontline communities, which is this very pivotal equity piece that, again, a lot of times sits in cities, right? Because of, the tracking routes and the emissions and so on. I don't have to tell you.
Yeah. Lena, can you give us the, for folks who don't know what the advanced clean truck rule is, can you give us like the Twitter version of that? Because some of our mobility funders may not have been tracking that really closely.
Yeah, sure. So it basically, don't quote me on the details, but it basically mandates electrification of trucks within different segments by, I believe, 2035. But the reason why it's really, really important is because freight or road freight is the last segment of mobility, of road mobility to electrify, meaning not the last that we're looking at last, but in that, it needs market support and larger batteries, and it really needs government support to make it happen. And this rule really signals to the market and to automakers and OEMs and the industry to scale up production, because the government is very much, the state of California, and actually many governments across the world are really, really interested in reducing those emissions quickly.
And California is such a great place to start. In the Port of Los Angeles, they've been trying hybrid trucks and electric trucks because the cities of Wilmington are negatively affected. And so good for you. It is a large portion of the footprint as we start to electrify vehicles. The heavy idling trucks are something we cannot afford to continue to allow to be spewing out GHG.
Yeah, and I love the model, as you say, of philanthropy, the traditional nonprofit partners, the industry getting involved, but also the frontline communities, the groups in the neighborhoods next to the ports, next to the rail yards, next to the big Amazon warehouses that are both suffering from the air pollution of all of this trucking, the noise, the traffic crashes, everything. So it's a neat convergence of interests, and raising up their voices in the process, I think is clearly where we need to be going.
So taking that lesson, you saw the opportunity in the running room to go with something like the matching fund. You had 3 issues or 3 reasons. Let's hear your third.
Yeah, so the third reason, perhaps to kind of the least surprise and the most obvious direction for us is, with the huge movement for specifically racial justice, but also racial and social justice that we've seen following the killing of George Floyd, a lot of non-governmental and philanthropic organizations have been really doing some soul searching on how to be better allies and how to really lift the voices, specifically knowing that Black and brown communities are most impacted by pollution, by climate impacts, and so on. And so Climate Works Foundation as a whole put out 7 commitments varying from internal diversity and inclusion work to external, to how we fund and who we fund and how we support the broader work and the movement of the field. And so that created a window for the transportation team to really, first of all, have a moment to assess of where are we investing, where does and how race shows up across our portfolio and our strategies. And then also have a moment to kind of reflect on what is our opportunity to change something. What is our financial lever or monetary level and lever, and how can we invest? And so Urban Mobility Fund really came forward as the intersection of, transport and climate, which we have traditionally been pushing on, since the start of Climate Works, but then also recognizing that we really need this equity piece, and that if we don't have the equity piece, then the climate wins and the transportation wins are not going to reach everybody. And we're really out there to promote zero emission mobility for all, not just for the wealthy. And so seeing that as the great combination of those 3 aspects, it became just a no-brainer for us. I think we also recognize that it's helping local cities. There's been a lot of talk about and fear around Carmageddon, and that we fear for that as well, because we have supported some work in cities, and we want cities to continue to decarbonize their transportation, and recognizing that transit, walking, biking, and shared micromobility are the key pillars to keep the emissions low and keep the spirit of sharing versus whether it's space or vehicles or rides, to keep that really going and strong. And you just need those advocacy groups on the ground to do that.
Yeah, you're so right. Mobility is the intersection of race, class, climate, health, social mobility. I think you're right. I think more and more funders are starting to see it that way.
Yeah, and it, looking at the data around the declines in transit ridership, one of the emerging pieces of data is that Black and brown people are still riding transit. People who are essential workers, people who don't have access to cars, or, families with only one car, they are even more heavily reliant on transit now, where, white folks with professional jobs are working from home. And so when you look at the decline in transit ridership, it's been higher among white people, lower among Black and brown people, which again just points to the the long-term disparities in our transportation system and the fact they're being exacerbated by coronavirus, as we see on many levels, but it totally is playing out in the transportation realm. So
I liked what you said about the intersection of new mobility choices through automation and through GPS. I think the micromobility component allows people to connect up to a variety of different other mobility choices. So it becomes mobility as a service. What service do you need? How do we make that as low carbon as possible? So I think that's going to be, especially within urban environments, that's going to be a larger and larger role of connecting people to that last mile of transit or biking and walking. So good stuff.
Yes, and I think actually one piece that sticks out to me is that I think it was a presentation that I heard by Beth Osborne, who's a great speaker, and she was making, I believe it was her that was making a distinction between choice riders, which are typically kind of have the office white collar jobs, and then the transit dependent riders. And that really stuck out to me because the transit dependent riders are the ones that tend to have service jobs that are still transit dependent and are still taking the train because they have no other choice. And to me, I think like if we could shift the transit dependent riders to be a choice rider by providing and supporting all these other modes, shared micromobility or walking, biking, greater access to other ways of moving around, all that with the foundation of zero emission transport, then I think that is really, really, really the goal for me, because it's really disheartening to see in the few times I have taken the bus or the train to see that I'm, just decided to hop on, but very well knowingly that everyone on the bus is trying to get to a job and they really didn't have a choice in taking an Uber or whatever it is. So.
Yeah. That's great. Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us both in the fund, and we look forward to continuing to have your intelligence and thoughtfulness as we build the fund out. We're going to certainly have other rounds, and we hope to be able to award more grants as the word gets out about this mobility matching fund. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this effort, and I'm looking forward to all the great work that the advocacy groups will accomplish with this money.
Yep. And we'll have updates about that. And for our audience, we'll also have in the notes links where you can see the proposals and see who won and who are the matching foundations that are local. So thanks for joining us. So that was a great interview with Lena. ClimateWorks has been such an essential partner in this, trying to bring the climate aspects of this together. I'd be interested in both of your thoughts of that interview.
Well, I'm just excited that a group like ClimateWorks and really some of the other climate funders who have been focusing on electrification are also seeing the value of what we think of as the mode shift work, the mobility work, and seeing some of the mobility funders also embracing electrification. There's a lot of collaboration and conversations going on, so that's encouraging. And more directly, as Beth noted earlier, just the value of supporting our local folks working on transit, walking, biking. They are grassroots. They are centering equity. They are the ones who can talk to their members of Congress and really make change.
Yeah, Martha, just jumping off of that point, obviously I think our work is very important, but there's a limit to what we can do. We create some great tools and information and we provide it to those locals, but it turns out members of Congress don't actually care what national groups think or what Beth Osborne thinks. I think that's terrible. They should care what I think, they should. But what they care about is what their constituents think. And so these on the ground local groups that know that congressional district, that know that senator's hometown, they're the ones who the exact same words coming out of their mouth is what makes the difference. But so few of those groups are funded to work at the federal level. This makes all the difference. And that's what really allows reports like driving down emissions to change the debate and change what we are able to accomplish.
That's great. Well, again, Beth, thanks for joining us. We'll see you again in about a week with an update on where transportation is going. Martha, thank you for being our co-host, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.